Hey everyone out there. I'm Casey O'Donnell. I'm an associate professor at Michigan State University. I want to start by just saying thanks to Brendan for putting this together. Organizing conferences and workshops it's always hard, and I think it's doubly hard in the time of COVID. So I just want to tell him thank you. Um, so I want to talk about non-digital independent game development, right? And the focus here is on studying game making, and I've been doing that for a long time. This, is my book where I was studying AAA game developers, and this was kind of in the moment really before digital distribution platforms really took off, and so it was this time of very traditional game production in the sense of where discs were pressed and they went to big box stores and sold, and there were publishers, and not to say that that structure just hasn't changed over time, but what was interesting to me is that more recently I've been paying attention to non-digital game development, and in part because friends of mine have been doing it, right? So local number 12 working on the metagame. My friend Matt working on a game called Overworld, and games that I just fangirl over, right? Like Consenticle and by Naomi Clark. And so, I saw this non-digital game production starting to happen through the eyes of friends and people I look up to, and I became interested in it, right? And so it's also rooted in work that I've been doing with Hermione Banger, and our work on Affinity games. In particular, our work on Fellowship of Fools, a game called Hazmat, and other things. And seeing this world of non-digital game production and starting to pay attention to that, in addition to not just digital game production and independent non-digital game production. And so, through my own work and also just spending a whole lot of time inside communities like that of the Game Crafter, right? The Game Crafter is a print-on-demand publishing company for non-digital game developers, right? It's kind of the original app store for non-digital game production, right? And they provide these tools and resources, but most importantly, I think they also provide a community, right? And they provide, people can provide feedback to one another on their artwork, but it's a way that you can get physical games printed, and they also offer a storefront, right? People can put their games up for sale there, and anyone can come along and purchase them. It is more expensive because it is a print on demand system. Um, but I became really interested in, well, non digital game production really, in many respects, looks a heck of a lot like the video game industry circa 1980s, 1990s, and what's happening there. Um, so it's also interesting because I look towards game conferences and awards, things like Indiecade, and non-digital games do get attention. I mean, I don't think as much as digital games, but they're there, right? And even something like Meaningful Play, where we have a special category for non-digital games, and so there is attention, but there hasn't been this kind of research attention to their production, right? In a very production studies centric kind of mode. And so that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately. And one of the things that I've found really fascinating is the rise of print to play as this way for non digital games to benefit from digital distribution platforms like itch, right? And so there are lots of print to play game developers that exist and thrive on itch, with the idea that their games, are distributed as PDFs, and maybe people print them or maybe they just view them on their computer because I don't actually know how many people have printers in their houses. Um, and uh, I've also been really interested in how independent game developers, particularly independent game developers who make non-digital games, are using things like itch um, and print plays, but also things like Tabletop Simulator and the ability to pull their games into this platform, right? Which in and of itself is also problematic because it costs money, and so sure you can kind of host games, but again, it requires um, the labor on the part of people um, making these games. The other thing that's really fascinating to me is, because non-digital game development is rooted in the physical production of artifacts, and really the print industry, there are links to right these kind of old requirements that people don't necessarily think about when they think about game production, right? And that you know that something like InDesign uh, rules the print world, and things like PostScript and PDF and bleeds, and right. I mean, and if you're physically cutting objects, right, like CNC machines, and so there's this really kind of um, important. It's important to pay attention to the kinds of artifacts and tools that shape production in this space as well. And I think in this moment, right, like in the moment of Game Workers Unite, right, thinking about labor and labor conditions and work, um, right, finally there is an attention to it, right. I, you know, I I was studying the AAA game industry when EA Spouse happened initially, right? And people started to talk about quality of life and crunch and all of these things, and it really just went away. And that was because of a new console cycle. And here we are now with the rise of Game Workers Unite. And I think there's this moment where I hope it doesn't I hope it doesn't fall apart in the ways that it did previously. I feel like there's momentum behind it, um, and you know, thanks a great deal to independent game developers and contingent workers and um, queer and trans game developers who have really been a major force behind this. And I think that is an important thing to acknowledge that um, that Game Workers Unite does have this its roots in a different kind of organizing as well. Um, and so one of the things that's been fascinating to me is as I look at independent non-digital game development is it actually has this really strange kind of interesting structure, right? That is rooted in a very old structure, right? So a lot of independent game, non-digital game developers, they start on Kickstarter because what do they need? They need money for production, right? Because they have to print this thing, and so all of that money from Kickstarter then goes to, getting a company, a manufacturing company that will print the thing, and then they have to figure out how to distribute it, and so right, like they end up being part of very much a traditional production cycle that I find kind of problematic, right? And not to say that anybody who has done this, is necessarily problematic themselves. It's again, this is the structure of the industry, and I don't really know if success being I'm on Amazon is the way to go, right? Or that success means being on the shelves at Target, right? Because those big box stores and Amazon, right? Like we're in this moment, right, where Jeff Bezos is getting richer and richer, and the employees at Amazon and workers at stores are getting sicker and sicker from COVID, and so yeah, this is a moment where we really need to question if that's what success looks like. Maybe maybe that's the problem. Maybe capitalism is the problem, and thinking more about small stores and local stores and ways to create community in this space. And so I want to sort of question, what does success look like for not just non-digital independent game development, but independent game development in general, right? If success is being featured on Steam, that too is part of exactly this phenomenon, this problem. And I also just want to point to how many independent non-digital game developers are out there doing really interesting and amazing work, right? Games like The Quiet Year, uh, and I'm a huge fan of Avery's work. And so independent non-digital game developers are out there doing interesting things and pushing the boundaries, um, and not necessarily being co-opted into these same systems. Um, and I think non-digital game development really is an area that we can look to because it is rooted in physical things which need to be produced, and yet finding ways to sort of work around existing structures and systems. Um, I'm not saying that I figured it out, right? Like, I'm just sort of starting off in this myself. And so, but I think most importantly, I think it is important to look at non-digital games when we're talking about production studies as well, because they get at some of the structures that I think have become slightly more nascent with the rise of digital distribution platforms in digital game production studies. And so we can pull at different strings when we look at non-digital games. Thanks so much again. I hope everyone enjoys the workshop and the other presentations. I know I'm looking forward to it as well.